Adapting is difficult. There's no doubt about this. But sometimes a certain adaptation comes about that is so baffling that, well, you can't help but ask, how did this happen? In part 1, we looked at the good. In part 2, we looked at the bad. And to end off the trilogy, my friends, today we look at the ugly. Yeah, we're talking about The Last Airbender. It's finally happening. Fucking kill me. For a little background, Avatar: The Last Airbender was a show that was released in the 2000s on Nickelodeon, and everyone watched it, and everyone loves it, and it's really good. It's one of few kids shows to have a linear story arc throughout its episodes, and it pulls it off really well. It's so fun to watch that you don't even have to be a kid to enjoy it, and I know that because I'm one of the only people on the planet, apparently, who didn't watch it when I was a kid. I watched it for the first time when I was an edgy teenager, and I still thought it was a dang jolly time. So with the immense success of the show, Nickelodeon decided to turn it into a movie, as all studios do when they have a successful show on their hands. Monetarily, this just seemed like it couldn't possibly go wrong. But what really mattered to cement the success of this planned film was who they chose to adapt it. So, who did Nickelodeon decide should direct their family adventure movie?
We're packing hot dogs for the road.
The reviews in America have been pretty harsh.
You know, hot dogs get a bad rap.
I don't know what's going on with me and the critics in the United States, I gotta tell you.
Got a cool shape, they got protein.
They just don't get you.
You like hot dogs, right?
They've never got me, and it's getting worse.
I'd like to imagine the board meeting at Nickelodeon when someone suggested that M. Night Shyamalan, known for making supernatural horror films, fresh off his streak of The Village, Lady in the Water, and The Happening, should direct this potential box office platinum hit.
What? No!
So they entrusted the movie to Shyamalan and then just let him do his thing. Apparently Hollywood only likes giving full creative control to directors when the directors have no idea what the fuck they're doing.
You know, and if it has stickiness,
The first red flags appeared during production when the original show creators started arguing with Shyamalan and then eventually walked away from the project entirely. That's not typically what you'd call a good sign. But hey, you know, there was still hope. I mean, this was the guy that made The Sixth Sense after all, right? So in 2010, when the movie launched, fans eagerly swarmed the theaters. And what did they think?
It sucked.
It sucked.
It's terrible.
It's horrible.
I really didn't like it.
Rushed the entire thing.
Like, it didn't, explain things fully.
The movie could have been as bad as it is right now, and if they had just called him Aang once!
I've never been more disappointed in a movie. I don't actually think M. Night Shyamalan has ever even seen this show.
I want my money back. Wow. And I actually wish I had my hair back, too.
I don't think. Did any of you guys like the movie? No!
Let's just take a step back from reveling in the train wreck that is this movie and just ask ourselves, how did this happen? How did a studio make and release this?
They must be playing some trick or something.
Let's try to answer that question by taking a look at the movie itself, shall we? Before even hitting play on the movie, after having just seen the cover, you may have already spotted some problems. I mean, for one, Aang's arrow has kind of melted into his head a little bit. Zuko's giant scar has turned into a little bruise, and I don't even want to touch what they did to Appa. But more pressingly, you may have noticed that Shyamalan has done a little bit of a race switcheroo on the cast. The good guys are white now, and the bad guys are brown. Oh dear. We haven't even made it past what one could glean from the trailer, and I already have 1,000 things to say. I mean, trying to analyze this film is like spilling a bowl of rice and trying to pick up each grain individually. Where do I even begin? Well, there's no place to start like the beginning, is there? The movie looks promising enough in the first few seconds when it recreates the original show's intro, albeit with no voiceover for whatever reason. Say, why did they get rid of that voiceover? Ah yes, so that they could save it for this text crawl.
Great respect was afforded to all those who could bend their natural element.
Opening text crawls, the hottest thing since canned bread. I'll give Shyamalan props. There is one thing that's pretty impressive about this text crawl, that being that it leaves out crucial information about the world. It fails to mention that all the men of the Water Tribe are currently gone, leaving it vulnerable. It mispronounces the word avatar.
The Avatar.
And it forgets that little detail about how the Fire Nation attacked. It forgets to tell us that. You went and slapped a giant wall of text on screen and still managed to miss stuff. Hot diggity. Then we get to actually see Katara and Sokka in all their white person glory. In the show, this scene was used to deliver us exposition about the world.
Why is it that every time you play with magic water, I get soaked?
It's water bending, and it's...
Yeah, an ancient art unique to our culture, blah, blah, blah.
As well as establishing these two characters and their relationship with each other.
I even wash all the clothes! Have you ever smelled your dirty socks? Let me tell you, not pleasant!
In this movie, it's used to remind us that Shyamalan can't write dialogue.
It worked better that time. I thought about Mom. Isn't that strange?
Yeah. Just stop doing that stuff around me. I always get wet.
But hey, there's an upside. Since Shyamalan forgot to actually write a relationship between Sokka and Katara, he doesn't have to set it up here. So that, clears the table a little bit.
Do not hit that spear!
Then the gang meets Aang, and the first of many awful writing decisions takes place. Guys, hear me out. This is a great idea. What if we cut Aang's first scene with Katara and Sokka from the show, time jump forwards into a random igloo, and then replace it with a rushed-ass scene that sounds like it's from Skyrim?
How'd you get all the way out here?
I ran away from home. We got in a storm. We were forced under the water of the ocean. It wasn't very smart. I was just upset. Thanks for saving me. I probably should get home.
You're not still upset?
Not as much as I was.
Then the Fire Nation show up. 7 minutes into the movie. This didn't happen until the second episode of the show, by the way, so we've already finished episode 1. That's efficiency. All it took was to jettison every single scene that built up character relations, but that's not important. Then Aang gets kidnapped by the Fire Nation and has to do some trials for them, and then they determine he's the Avatar, and then he runs away. And then Sokka and Katara are there, who are now friends with him after 30 seconds of getting to know him, and are just such good friends with him that they're ready to ride or die with him to the end.
I have to go back now.
We'll come with you.
I could take you back to the village.
We're going with you.
They don't even know his name yet, by the way. In the show, it made some semblance of sense why they'd risk everything to protect him, since they'd spent 20 minutes of screen time bonding with him, as opposed to 30 seconds.
Just a guy with a boomerang. I didn't ask for all this flying and magic.
Also in the show, Zuko actively tried to pursue Aang instead of just staring at him as he flew away. And that concludes episode 2 of the show, and we're about 15 minutes into the movie. Holy shit. What I just described to you guys is one of the most empty, hollow openings to a movie I've ever seen. Everything falls so flat. Like, they try to add in this joke where Sokka gets hit with Appa's tail, but there's no humor here. In the original, it was funny to see misfortune befall Sokka because he was so overconfident and so cocky all the time, but here he's just a normal person. So, what's funny about this?
It's trying to eat me!
Not a single character is engaging in any way, shape, or form. There's no hook to draw viewers' attention, and it moves at such a breakneck pace that it's impossible to get yourself to actually care about anything. And on the topic of pacing, this movie has just impressively bad pacing. The movie moves so quickly that hugely important information is just conveyed through a sloppy voiceover.
He told us how he left there in a storm on Appa and got forced into the ocean where they almost drowned. Aang airbended a sphere around them and ice formed, and he couldn't remember anything after that.
It's hard for me to feel very much emotion during the scene when we find out that Aang's people are dead, given that I only found out that they existed in the first place about 2 minutes ago through a voiceover, and then the movie just moves on from it 1 minute later.
He's kind of like my father.
Less than 30 minutes into the movie, we're already at the end of episode 6, when Aang leads an insurrection. In the show, this is a big moment because it's one of the first times Aang steps up as the Avatar to protect a large group of people who all fight alongside him. But in the movie, I just don't give a shit. If you thought the movie was moving fast up to this point, then you haven't watched further, because the next 30 minutes of the movie feels roughly like a highlight reel of scenes from the show just sort of thrown together with nothing in between them. And to make matters even more bizarre, a lot of the events that happen are out of order or taken from multiple different episodes and mashed together into a kind of Frankenstein's monster version of the plot. At one point, they take the plot line from when Aang goes to the Northern Air Temple in episode 17, except they cut everything that actually happens there and replace it with this like watered down version of the episode 3 plot when he finds the Avatar Temple. But then they also mash in episode 13 when Aang gets captured by archers and then rescued, and it's kind of a fucking mess. Also, by the way, how the fuck did these guys ambush Aang? He just came here spontaneously. This old dude led him into the temple the second he landed. There wasn't even time to like tip anyone off. Like, did you all know he was coming? You guys just been waiting behind these statues for 100 years? I really don't think that anyone who hadn't watched the show would be following what was happening at all. Only when they arrive at the Northern Water Tribe does the movie finally slow down. I don't know if this is just whiplash, but this final CGI fight kind of loses my interest very quickly. So basically Admiral Zhao shows up and then he stabs the super important fish, which causes Sokka's girlfriend to pass out, but then she wakes up and she's like, I'm gonna sacrifice myself and I'll become the fish now. It makes sense in the show.
It's time we show the Fire Nation that we believe in our beliefs as much as they believe in theirs. I'm scared.
So she sacrifices her hair dye, and then order is restored. Then Aang makes a big wave, makes this face, and that's the last time we ever see him. Great ending. And the last scene just exists to set up a sequel that will never come out. Glorious. I could continue to elaborate why the pacing in this movie is so fucking dog shit, but I don't think I have to, because in an interview, Shyamalan already explained that he doesn't know how to structure films.
Is The Sixth Sense a 3-act narrative? Look at this film school. I'm not sure. It's funny, I don't really think like that, but I'm sure it's true because what feels natural, right? I think my movies have a kind of a, it's by the nature of them, because there's a revelation, there's probably a fourth movement in them. I don't know if that falls into the 3-act structure like that.
And by the way, Shyamalan seems like a pretty nice guy, so it kind of, doesn't make me feel good being this mean to him. Look, you don't have to use the 3-act structure. There's plenty of films that don't. But you do need some structure. Something. Okay, I think the pacing of this video will get a little bogged down if I spend any more time talking about this. So let's move on to the next thing that sucks the life out of this film. The characters. Every single character has had their character itself sucked away. These characters are so bastardized that Shyamalan can't even pronounce their names correctly. There's no excuse for that, by the way. These are made-up names. It's not like you're adapting a book where one could argue the pronunciation is subjective. You're adapting a TV show where the names are all explicitly said out loud. To somehow still pronounce them all wrong could only have been a conscious decision. But why the fuck would you ever do that? Let's start with Aang. It is crystal clear from Aang's very first scene that he is an upbeat, playful character.
I need to ask you something.
What?
Will you go penguin sledding with me?
Sure.
He can be ever so slightly childish or selfish at times, but he is someone who would stick with his friends to the end and would always try to do the right thing no matter the cost. Okay, now let's look at the movie. In the movie, Aang is...
Thanks for bringing Appa to me. The Fire Nation is up to something. I have to go back now.
Okay, well, he displays signs of not wanting the Fire Nation to win.
Fire Nation has destroyed this temple. They want to take it back. 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 They They have ruined everything.
Okay, they messed up the mainest main character, but what about the other main characters? They could still be salvaged. How about Katara? In the show, Katara is similarly loyal and moral the way Aang is, however she's a lot less playful and has less of a sense of humor. She's more on task than they are. This eventually leads to an internal struggle that Katara fights with herself, as she becomes paranoid that she's becoming too much of a mother figure to her friends, never truly able to become buddies with them.
What do you think, Aang? Do I act like a mom?
Well,
Stop rubbing your eye and speak clearly when you talk.
Yes, ma'am.
In the movie, Katara wants to help Aang, doesn't like the Fire Nation. Okay, fuck that, let's talk about Sokka. He's the easiest to carry over of the three characters. He practically just serves as comedy relief.
Sokka, there's nothing there!
I mean, like, how can you fuck that up?
What would you do if they tried taking me away?
I'd kill them all.
Who the fuck is this? What?
They prey on the weakest towns and villages. We should go visit some of these towns.
Oh, I get it. They decided to adapt the most funny, egotistical, wisecracking character into Wood. Okay, well that's the main three protagonists ruined, and trust me, their interactions with each other aren't much better. All moments of friendship between Aang,
My name is Aang.
Ung and Katara, or between Ung and Sokka, Sokka, are completely lost. You know, when it's this movie we're talking about, it might be appropriate that every single character's name is pronounced wrong. I mean, let's be honest, this isn't Aang, and this isn't Sokka. This is the Ballad of Ong. This is Ong's story. There's no believability in their friendship either. Katara and Sokka don't even ask Aang his name until they've already risked their lives for him and committed themselves to an adventure with him.
Is it okay if you tell me your name?
The monks named me Aang.
General Iroh.
My name is Iro.
How the fuck did they not even get that? General Iroh has gone from being a wise mentor to a creepy guy with a beard that says weird shit to Zuko. Speaking of Zuko, he has been transformed into a caricature of himself like everyone else. We should just be thankful that they don't pronounce his name Zuko. And by the way, in season 1, Zuko was the least fleshed out that his character would ever be on the show. So it's almost impressive that they still somehow managed to make him seem even flatter. I dread to think how Shyamalan would have depicted Zuko's turn to the light side in season 3, since that was pretty complex, especially for children's television. It probably would have made Anakin Skywalker's descent into evil feel too slow and gradual. And I especially don't even want to think about what he would have done to Toph. Thank God Nickelodeon took the hint and didn't make sequels. Sokka's relationship with you, which is fleshed out in the show, is reduced to a voiceover insert telling you that Sokka likes you.
My brother and the princess became friends right away.
Which means audiences will feel nothing when she dies, like a few scenes later. Even characters who aren't important yet are at least partially ruined, like the Fire Lord. The show waited 2 seasons to even show us his face, shrouding him in darkness before that. That was pretty cool. Don't you think that's cool, movie?
Yes.
Well, then why didn't you do it? Because you just show his face from the first scene he's in. There's no reveal. It's boring. Alright, how about the world that the characters are in? I mean, this movie is clearly so focused on just hitting plot points without actually making you care about the characters that are experiencing those plot points. You'd at least think that the world those plot points take place in would, be fleshed out. From all that extra time that you didn't spend expanding on the characters at all. Right? Basically, every single side character from the original is nowhere to be found. Many plot holes are created, such as the Fire Nation holding prisoner Earthbenders in an open field full of Earth, as opposed to the metal ship that they were held in on the show, so that they couldn't Earthbend. It's made even stupider by the fact that they somehow didn't realize they can use their Earthbending until Aang,
My name is Aang.
Ong, tells them to. The bending itself is lame as shit.
It has to have a sticky quality to it.
The film is over-reliant on extreme close-ups for some reason, which is incredibly uncomfortable. 99% of the world building from the show is nowhere to be found. They don't even do a good job describing the Fire Nation or what its goals are, which is especially impressive considering the Fire Nation's goals are about as simple as you can fucking get. Conquer the world. That's all you had to indicate to us, movie. They made a Last Airbender movie and didn't once mention the phrase, the Fire Nation attacked. But listen, you don't need to take my word for it. Why don't we look at a specific scene and see how Shyamalan adapted it? I mean, there's just so many great options to pick from. There's this, getting turned into this, or maybe this, becoming this. How the fuck are you so fucking stupid? But I think one of the best examples of Shyamalan's adaptation style is the death of Zhao. This scene is incredibly important not only as the climax to the season's story arc, but the demise of arguably the season's main antagonist. Throughout the season, he constantly clashes with Zuko. He wants to build a legacy for himself amongst the Fire Nation as a great conqueror. Zuko fights for a cause he believes is right and to regain his sense of lost honor, whereas Zhao is fueled by a sense of pride and ego. Because of this, Zuko is willing to show mercy, whereas Zhao is not. So once Zhao's siege of the Southern Water Temple goes horribly awry, and he is attacked by the very same ocean spirit he rashly attempted to snuff out, Zuko still tries to save him despite their differences, but because of his pride, he does not accept, allowing himself to die rather than be saved by everything he hates. It's honestly a very important moment not just for the story, but for Zuko's character. Here's a quick little heavily abridged rundown of how that fight goes.
You're alive?
You tried to have me killed!
Yes, I did. You're the Blue Spirit, an enemy of the Fire Nation. You freed the Avatar. You should have chosen to accept your failure, your disgrace. Then, at least, you could have lived.
All right, very nice, very nice. Now why don't we take a look at Shyamalan's version, shall we?
I killed you.
Come away from him, nephew. We must leave immediately. He wants to fight you so he can capture you, Zuko. Walk away! You stand alone, and that has always been your great mistake.
Now, for starters, for some reason in this version, Iroh shows up and saves Zuko. Now, let's just consider the significance of this scene super quickly. The tension between Zhao and Zuko has been building up over an entire season. Zuko is determined to prove himself as being strong, as opposed to the weak boy that Zhao sees him as. So his ability to actually win this fight on his own is a huge moment for him. And yes, Zuko had beaten Zhao once before this, but that had been a kind of, test run of the real fight. Zuko didn't choose to actually finish Zhao off, and then Zhao, being the little bitch he is, tried to attack him when his back is turned, which meant Iroh had to step in to prevent Zuko from fucking dying. The point is, this is one of the first moments in the show when Zuko truly proves himself, at least in a way that would be significant to him. Having Iroh just show up and save his ass destroys all of this. Compounded by the fact that Shyamalan also removed the first duel between the two of them, meaning that there's just no duel whatsoever in the movie. Not only does he not prove himself in any capacity, not only does his rivalry with Zhao get no real conclusion, but he doesn't even have the chance to offer Zhao mercy. Which brings me to the second big change Shyamalan made. Zhao is no longer killed by the sea spirit, now he's killed by 4 random nameless waterbenders who just run up to him, put him in a ball of water, and then drown him. All the setup that you spent all this time planting led nowhere significant.
We are now the gods.
I mean, forget how much this removes a hugely important part of Zuko's character growth. This just completely butchers the character of Zhao. In the show, we watched his decisions get more and more rash, until eventually, his own misplaced sense of pride came back to bite him. On top of being killed by the water spirit as the result of his own dumb fuckery, he throws away his only chance at survival over something no less petty than jealousy. It's a great end to a deluded character. In the movie, some random waterbenders show up, he attempts to surrender to them, which is completely fucking out of character, and then they just kill him. He doesn't die as a result of his own ego, he just dies. You can probably understand where I'm coming from when I say that to make this many fundamental mistakes in just one scene displays a complete misunderstanding of the source material to a degree that's honestly kind of legendary. A lot of what makes the show great is its sense of humor, or at the very least sense of fun. I watched the show for the first time not that long ago and still enjoyed it despite not being 12. That's because the show is genuinely charming and unique. It's one of very few kid shows to have memorable characters who grow and change over the course of the entire show's run. That's why removing not only the charm or arcs, but also the character from these characters absolutely kneecaps the story. Do you really think the only reason people watched was just for the epic bending battles? Oh wait, even if they did watch only for that, they'd still hate this movie. Let's just pretend for a moment that this movie didn't royally fuck up everything I just mentioned. Let's hypothesize a film where the characters are accurate, the world building exists, and the directing isn't laughably bad. Would it work? I would argue probably not. It would be better, but the concept of turning this show into a 90-minute film was flawed from the start. Season 1 of The Last Airbender is quite episodic. It's not designed to be much of an overarching story, but rather a series of episodes which loosely connect until the season finale kind of ties everything together. Kind of how Doctor Who seasons used to feel under RTD. Almost every episode in Season 1 is a different adventure in a different location. Episodes from Seasons 2 and 3, especially 3, flow more as a single connected story. Don't get me wrong, there's still not enough time in a movie to properly adapt Seasons 2 or 3. It would just be a little bit more possible than Season 1. Season 1, on the other hand, was just never going to work in film form, in my opinion, unless a group of writers are seriously willing to write an entirely new plot from the ground up with the same important story beats and characters. A bit like The Witcher. But that would have required effort, which is a little beyond the scope of Shyamalan's writing crew. So instead they just tried to cram roughly 12 episodes out of a 20-episode season into an hour and a half, and the results speak for themselves. I'll mention that as of making this video, there's another Last Airbender adaptation in the works, coming from, you guessed it, Netflix. And I really don't know how to feel about this. I guess only time will tell. Since it's a TV show and not a film, I mean, it has a better chance, but a lot of the charm of the original show comes from the animation, so I'm not sure if the live action is going to do it any favors. Oh, what's this? The original creators left because of creative differences? Yeah, okay, yeah, it's going to suck ass. Let's go ahead and turn this into a proper video essay for a minute and get a little pretentious with it. What does the word adaptation actually mean? I mean, it's essentially just a synonym for the word change, and what is change if not the one constant driving force in the universe? Everything that exists constantly adapts to its ever-shifting surroundings, whether it be a species evolving, an individual person climatizing to their surroundings, or a Japanese game about an obese Italian plumber who fights a dinosaur man over the world's most incompetent monarch, turning into this movie. All adaptation really is a change in a story's environment. Even this video is an adaptation of the original script I wrote, and boy, let me tell you, was that script ever different from what you're watching right now. This was supposed to be a single-part 20-minute video originally. I'm not joking. And not only that, but there were originally only 5 sentences about The Hobbit in the script. 5 sentences. So yeah, I did indeed get a little carried away on the revisions. But you know what? Fuck it, I'm happy I got carried away. As I worked on the video, it slowly evolved. I wanted to add more detail and cover more bases, and as such, I slowly morphed the script into the 3 videos that exist today. Also, I was planning to follow up this with an entirely different video about the soulless Disney remakes, but at this point I feel like I've already touched on the exact same bases I would have in that video, at least as it stands. So assuming I won't one day end up making that video, I'll adapt it into a 1-paragraph summary. Here it is. The loss of the original 2D animation in favor of live action and or CGI hurts these films not only in terms of the visuals, but also the soul. The characters show less expression, the action feels more tame, and the larger-than-life scripts which were originally written to be animated feel suddenly dull. The best Disney remakes are also the ones that feel very different from their animated counterparts, though even those ones aren't actually that great to be honest. On the other hand, films like The Lion King, which attempt to more or less recreate the original film scene for scene, just feel like shitty half-assed versions of the original, and the new scenes they add are stupid and the voice actors are worse. Boom! That's an entire video adapted into this one. How's that for efficiency? Okay, let's not beat around the bush here. The burning question on everyone's mind is how to make a good adaptation. Well, fuck if I know, I'm just a nobody YouTuber, but I'll still take a crack at it anyways. Why not? When looking over all of these films, I started to notice a pattern that seemed consistent between them. And from this pattern, I derived a secret Krabby Patty formula of how to adapt source material. And this formula comprises everything we've already gone over, so forgive me if I maybe repeat myself a little bit, but I'll explain the formula itself in a second. But first, let's start with pre-production, aka what stories should be chosen to be adapted in the first place. For starters, you should only adapt a book or game or an ancient scroll or a porno or whatever the fuck you're adapting if you have a concrete idea of how to make it work in its new medium.
Then take an aspirin or something.
Only if you have some of that sniffling, sneezing, coughing, aching, stuffy head fever so I can die medicine.
Live-action film works super well for a visual adventure like Lord of the Rings, and super poorly for a slow, internal, thought-heavy drama like The Great Gatsby. That's why all 5 attempts to adapt The Great Gatsby haven't really succeeded. The special effects in the 1949 version are fire, though. Adapting plays can be very risky too. Moreover, sometimes films try to jam a 5-act play structure into a traditional shorter 3-act film structure, and the results are just quite messy. Since plays have to hold your attention for between 2 to 3 hours without cutting around or adding any explosions to do so, they tend to be very expressive. And sometimes these film adaptations, which are supposed to be serious, end up feeling a little goofy. Look no further than the Les Mis adaptation.
Do not forget my name!
I'm not going to talk about cats, don't mention cats. So what works better if you want to adapt a more energetic source material? Well, sometimes the answer is animation. Animation complements energetic and emotive stories by allowing more energy and emotion to shine through in the characters and the worlds. Anime adaptations, for instance, are super popular because manga, a very in-your-face and visually expressive form of art, works very well in a similarly in-your-face audio-visual form. And that's why it's such a fucking crime when Netflix or Disney takes a super expressive animated property and turns it into a dead live-action fucking boring movie. Just look at this scene from the Aladdin remake.
Most powerful in the universe, at last!
And then look at how much more fun it was in the original animated movie.
The universe is mine to command, to control!
The difference is night and day. Animation just opens doors that live action can't. And sometimes, for super long source material, movies just aren't viable. You can't always cram everything into 2 hours. Sometimes a good workaround is to make a fake adaptation, i.e. you take a previously existing franchise and all of its characters, but you make an entirely new story for your film. This is the case for J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies. But this only worked because there wasn't very much of an overarching story in Star Trek to begin with, so in some cases, a TV show may be the necessary form your adaptation will have to take. Delving deeper, there exist subcategories of TV shows. Episodic shows like Seinfeld, and yes, I know that's not an adaptation, it's just an example, and narrative-driven shows like Breaking Bad. Episodic shows have a consistent cast, but a different disconnected story each episode, whereas narrative-driven shows tell one story common throughout all episodes leading up to a climax at the end of the show. Depending on your source material, one of these types of show will work better than the other. If you're adapting a series of novels, like the Wheel of Time series, you're going to want to go with a narrative show, whereas if you're adapting something like the Archie comics, you're probably going to want to go for something more episodic. And you're definitely going to want to not do whatever the fuck Riverdale is doing. Please just stay away from that.
Veronica?
Hey, Ethel.
For your crimes against the town of Riverdale, we find you guilty. Your sentence is this.
By the way, when I was finding cringy footage of Riverdale for this segment, I noticed that Netflix uploads cringe compilations of Riverdale. Riverdale is so bad that even Netflix takes shots at it.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in.
I'll also clear up that I think there may have been some confusion in the last video when I said The Witcher feels all over the place to me because certain episodes don't contribute anything to the greater narrative. I said that because The Witcher seems like it's trying to be a narrative-driven show, not an episodic show, and because of that, random side quests feel wasteful, as they distract from the main plot. That's just my opinion though. So anywho, you've probably heard the phrase, the medium is the message. This is key to adapting, and using the wrong medium for a story is like using the wrong pair of lenses for your eyes. Everything will come out blurry. It's imperative to pick a style that works with the story. However, there does exist one life hack you can employ to bypass this problem, which is just to put Chris Pratt into your film. He's so cool. As long as Chris Pratt plays the main character in your adaptation, it will always be good. That's the rule.
It's a me. Mario.
And when you're picking the story you want to adapt, please, for the love of God, make sure it's finished, because adapting an unfinished source material can be disastrous. Two examples of this happening automatically come to mind: Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and Game of Thrones. Both of these pieces of media I absolutely love, or loved, but both of them faced the difficulty of trying to adapt an unfinished story. Now, I think it's safe to say that Scott Pilgrim vs. the World actually managed to succeed where Game of Thrones failed, and this is because Edgar Wright identified the themes and patterns found within the original comic book, quirky, comedic, over-the-top, etc., then identified tropes commonly found within action comedy films, and fused them together to create an ending that both feels true to the source material and works as an ending for the admittedly very different film. And if you don't want to know how the Scott Pilgrim movie ends, skip forward to this time. Alright, you've been warned. While fighting the main baddie, Gideon, Scott gets stabbed and he dies. But luckily, since in classic video game fashion he grabbed a 1-up earlier in the movie, he gets to respawn and try the fight again, actually knowing what the fuck to do this time. When the comic was written, it also involved Scott dying and being resurrected by a 1-up, but he didn't go back to his last checkpoint, he just got resurrected straight where he was, meaning that the final fight isn't repeated twice. So essentially, we have two climaxes back to back. It's very wacky, it's very cool, and it has such a fun coat of paint on it that it feels like it matches with the zaniness of the rest of the story perfectly. And because it's such a good ending, in a rare turn of events, it actually influenced the original comic, which was completed after the film. That's how you know it was a good ending.
When me and Michael Bacall wrote that ending, Brian had not finished the books. By the time we were sort of making it, there were 3 books out, and Brian had the outlines for the final 3. But then Brian didn't really stick to those outlines. He kind of just was, kind of having fun, sort of inventing it as he went along. And I think once he'd read the screenplay, I think in a way that probably in a very George R.R. Martin way, it sort of encouraged him to sort of like, well, I'm going to do something different, because he needed ownership of the books. So what Brian eventually did was different from the outlines that we had. And that was fine, because I kind of felt like, well, this is okay for these things to diverge, it is an adaptation.
Now, let's look at Game of Thrones. Don't worry, I won't ruin the ending for you if you haven't seen it. Not like it matters anyways, the ending's already been ruined by these guys. To put it briefly, after they ran out of books to adapt, the head writers of Game of Thrones found themselves piloting a train with no more tracks underneath it. Suddenly, characters don't feel like themselves, plot lines randomly disappear, and the ending makes about as much logical sense as the Eric Andre show.
Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces.
Essentially, the writers failed to identify the main themes and tropes, or anti-tropes in the case of A Song of Ice and Fire, that were prevalent within the story. The result is an ending that not only doesn't feel like it tonally matches with the first half of the show, but also doesn't work from a basic story standpoint. At one point, the show focused on exploring power structures and complex character flaws which would ultimately be their undoing. But later on, the writers were just like,
God damn it, we want a zombie polar bear.
What the hell is this plot?
So just to be on the safe side, even though it can work out, wait till your source material is actually fucking written before you adapt it, you money-hungry fucks. Also, make sure to pick a story that complements your directing style. Too often, I think directors pick stories that don't really match with their style and then try to force their stamp onto it. And, yeah, I'm talking about The Great Gatsby. Great! Now that you've picked something that will work in its new medium, and that's finished, you can start actually making the adaptation. And it's here that we start with step 1 of the patented Verdana adaptation formula. What's that? Oh wait, no, I'm just remembering. There's actually one more little prerequisite that you have to make sure you don't fuck up before you start making the adaptation. Don't whitewash the cast. Netflix. That one's pretty straightforward, so just don't do that, and you'll be good. Alright, here's step 1. At the heart of every story is an identity. Now, what are the first things you think of when you hear Titanic? Tragedy, romance, lost potential. I'll never let go. What do you think of when you hear Who Framed Roger Rabbit? A crossover between live action and animation. Goofy fun. Learning to try new things. Putting aside your biases. The point is that every story has core themes, emotions, and morals that define it. To give an example, Avatar: The Last Airbender is a fun, lighthearted, character-driven show about unlocking your full potential. It isn't just Aang who has to master all 4 elements to unlock his chakras and truly become the Avatar. Katara has to learn to put aside notions of vengeance and to overcome her need to be in control. Sokka has to overcome his childishness and dismissiveness towards others. Zuko has to overcome being an evil motherfucker. Practically every character experiences growth throughout the series, ending off as the version of themselves they always wanted to be. This is clearly the main theme of the show. So when a movie came out in 2010 that not only isn't fun, isn't lighthearted, isn't character-driven, but entirely lacks the show's core message of self-betterment, you can understand why people complained that it feels nothing like the show it's trying to emulate. The film fails to capture the show's essence. As Wright did with Scott Pilgrim, or Coppola did with The Godfather, one must first identify the perfect Socraterian vibe of the source material, whatever it may be, and ensure that it carries through into the adaptation. Unless, of course, you opt to go for the alternative method, which is to intentionally shroud the story in an entirely new light, like The Shining. The surface of the film may appear the same in terms of characters and events that occur, but the core of the movie will be completely different. This obviously has a great potential to blow up in your face, since people doubtless like the original story as it already is, but this can go a long way in cementing your adaptation as being distinct from or even better than the original. If you really want to go all the way with it and write an entirely new script that very loosely pertains to the subject matter, a bit like the 2002 movie Adaptation, then by all means do it, but at that point most people won't even consider your film an adaptation at all. So be warned, this is an extremely high-risk strategy, which should usually be avoided unless you know for a fact that you have a really good idea. I'll continue going forward with the formula on the assumption that you chose to match the vibe of the source material as opposed to subverting it. This central idea driving your source material we will refer to as I, because that makes it sound mathematic and academic. Congratulations, you've identified the core essence of your source material. Great work! On to step 2 of the patented Verdana adaptation formula. Now you gotta make huge changes to it. Have fun! If you're transferring something from, say, book to film, you have no choice but to make sweeping changes to the source material. Generally, you have to cut, and then cut, and then cut some more if you want the film to actually fit within a movie's traditional running time. So yeah, you may lose a Tom Bombadil along the way, but it's a necessary sacrifice. as heartbreaking as it is. Additionally, you will have to shorten chunks of dialogue. Now, books are a very different animal from films. Readers can consume a book at their own pace and construct the world however they want in their heads, whereas a movie shows you a predetermined, pinpointed vision of said world that a viewer has no control over. And again, books are obviously much longer than films. I think it's safe to say that long, flowery dialogue can be very interesting in a book, whereas in a film it can feel like a waste of time. So while adapting, you gotta make that shit be more to the point. As I mentioned in part 1, if your adaptation remains within the same medium as the source material, i.e. it's a remake, then you really gotta make changes to justify your version's existence. If you make a film that's trying to be the exact same as the original, it has no point, and people will only notice the flaws with your version. So give the story a new wardrobe, tell it from a new perspective. Whatever adds some new flavor to this old zesty pasta will do. The original Willy Wonka movie comes to mind as a film that pulls this off beautifully.
What would a computer do with a lifetime supply of chocolate? I am now telling the computer exactly what he can do with a lifetime supply of chocolate.
Adding a new adult and somewhat cynical spin to the story.
Wait till I get a real one. Pop won't let me have one yet, will you, Pop?
Not till you're 12, son.
Whilst holding on to the original whimsy and morals. And if you want an example of a film remake, then look at the other Willy Wonka movie. There had already been an adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, so Warner Bros. Knew if they were going to commission another one, it would have to be different. So they brought on Tim Burton and they made something. This one has a kind of modern, spooky, gothic vibe to it, but again, it still holds on to the whimsy and morals of the original story. It's definitely more divisive than the original, but it seems like most people like it, and again, it's definitely unique. So how do you know how much to change? Well, honestly, that's kind of up to you. All that's vital is that you change what you have to change. Whatever is incompatible with the new form the story is being told through must be cut. We'll refer to the incompatible stuff as N, for not applicable, and we'll call the reworks R. The next two steps are pretty easy to explain. Step 3 is ensuring that your film's pacing isn't broken as a result of Step 2. I know that this is hard, like really hard, but even though you cut like a billion things, you need to make sure that your film flows naturally. It's important to give audiences time to actually soak in the world and characters before you throw action in their faces. It's also important to ensure that scenes actually lead into each other. If the characters suddenly appear at a new location without an explanation, then audiences will get confused. There are so many adaptations that just feel weird and jagged with their pacing because so much material had to be cut to meet the running time that the story just feels like a skeleton of its former self. Sometimes the pacing's so bad that the plot barely makes any goddamn sense anymore. Do not end up like The Last Airbender, please. How do we represent this? Well, you have to figure out what the length of your adaptation should be and then multiply everything else by that. So how does one calculate this? Do you use maths? Well, if you want to use maths, I noticed that if you take the page count of a book and divide that by 3, more often than not, that tends to be the running time of its film counterpart in minutes, which I guess implies that movies tend to be about 1/6 as long as books, since on average it takes about 2 minutes to read a page. So boom, solved. If you're making a book adaptation, just divide by 3, the magic number 3.
3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3 3.
That'll work, right? No, it won't. That's an incredibly arbitrary number, and the length and pacing of your adaptation will always vary depending on the source material. If you're adapting something that's super dense, like Dune, even if it isn't very long, you're going to have to account for that in the pacing. The 1982 adaptation of Dune failed to account for how much world building and information is required to actually understand what the fuck's happening, whereas the new one pulled it off by splitting the book into 2 parts. And keep in mind, Dune's only like 400 pages, which is average. So instead of using actual hard numbers, I just have a variable, P. P stands for pacing. It's based off the density and length of your original source material, and it'll vary based on what medium that source material is. Something dense like Dune will require slower pacing and thus a longer length. And no matter how quick your pacing may be, it's vital that you don't lose important plot or character beats. And that's actually a pretty good segue into step 4, preserve the characters. Again, you do not want to end up like The Last Airbender on this count. This is a sticking point for most people. You can make sweeping changes to the plot, but if you do not accurately represent a character, people will lose their minds. We'll represent characters as C. Easy. You're allowed to make little improvements here and there if you think the character is inconsistent, a little bit like Snape in the Harry Potter films, but you have to generally keep true to the heart of what was originally there. And, yeah, you should be safe from the guillotine. So let's symbolize all of these steps in one stupid, overcomplicated equation, shall we? Take the inherent idea behind your source material and remove what is incompatible by reworking it. Then multiply that all by P, which is the pacing that you think best reflects your source material. This will dictate the length of your adaptation. Then after that, add C for characters, because whilst you can afford to take chunks out of the plot, you cannot afford to take chunks out of the characters themselves. All of that together equals your adaptation. And holy fuck, this is so overcomplicated. What have I created? You, my friend, may very well have just created and marketed a fantastic adaptation. Else my system doesn't work. I don't know, I haven't actually tried it. When all is said and done, no matter how good your adaptation is, sometimes people are just biased. Some people will always prefer the original version of the story they fell in love with, and that's okay. It's less okay when they send death threats to the actors and director, but we'll work on that. And sometimes people just naturally prefer one medium to another. It's a matter of comparing apples and oranges. They're both very different, and some people simply prefer one to the other. I myself may be affected by bias. I may say that I prefer the Harry Potter books to the films, but I also admit that the books aren't written flawlessly by any means, as well as the fact that the films are pretty damn fun adaptations that pull off what they were trying to achieve. Is it just because I grew up with the books more so than I did with the films that I prefer them? Perhaps. Or maybe I'm just right. As usual. Let's get back to the film Adaptation, written by Charlie Kaufman and released in 2002. Bear with me here. The film was supposed to be an adaptation of the book The Orchid Thief, but when Kaufman was approached to adapt the book to film, he realized that it was a fucking impossible task because the book is literally just a super long dry account of some guy getting arrested for orchid poaching.
Digresses in long passages, blah, blah, blah. No narrative really unites these passages. New York Times book review. I can't structure this. The book has no story. There's no story.
So after a long, arduous process of trying to figure out what to do, the film ended up being a super surreal comedy starring Nicolas Cage as Charlie Kaufman and as Charlie Kaufman's twin brother at the same time. And the plot is that Charlie Kaufman can't figure out how to adapt the book.
Okay, we open with LaRoche. No, we open at the beginning of time. We open on Charlie Kaufman. Fat, bald, ugly, paces.
And then he has a mental breakdown, and then the plot completely derails, and then Charlie gets abducted by the book's author, and there's a fucking murderous crocodile. So basically what I'm saying is that I fucking love this movie. And it's basically just a confession that Kaufman doesn't know how to adapt this goddamn book. Just like I had no idea how to make a 20-minute YouTube video, and it ended up becoming a 2.5-hour long trilogy instead. The end result in both cases is something that I think is better than the original concept. So what does this film ultimately say about adapting in general? I mean, it's hard to say if adaptation is even an actual adaptation at all, since it's so far removed from the book.
You shut up! Fuck you, lady!
On the one hand, it's a completely different story from The Orchid Thief, and it references the existence of the book within itself, but all adaptations make changes to their source material. I mean, at one point in development, the film was an actual adaptation, but it gradually drifted away from that. My question is this: where is the line in the sand when an adaptation stops being an adaptation? When precisely is it too different to be considered the same? Well, that's kind of getting into philosophical Ship of Theseus territory. Maybe the real answer to that question isn't to pinpoint an exact moment when a screenplay is or isn't an adaptation, but rather to confess that there is no line whatsoever. Because it never stops being an adaptation. Because everything is an adaptation. Yes, you can argue that every movie ever made is an adaptation if you try hard enough. And you can go beyond that to say any piece of art is an adaptation if you try hard enough. I don't mean to say this literally, of course. An original screenplay is an original screenplay, but practically every story we write is based to some extent upon pre-existing story tropes and archetypes. Every story we write was influenced by other pieces of art or experiences that impacted us. Many believe that there only exist 7 basic plots, those being overcoming the monster, rags to riches, the quest, voyage and return, comedy, tragedy, and rebirth. By this theory, every single new story we put out is just a rework of one of these 7. And if you really want to get philosophical, every story we write is to some extent an adaptation of the real world. And I'm not just talking about films that recreate a historical event like Titanic, though those are definitely adaptations too. I mean to say that every piece of art, whether consciously or not, is dictated by the lived experiences of its creators as well as other art that the creator came into contact with. There is a certain class of film that we have labeled as adaptations, but they're not alone in their borrowing of source material by any means. They're just actually upfront about it. The key difference is that when a film openly adapts a pre-existing source material and keeps the same name, people go into it knowing what to expect. They already know where the story is supposed to go, who the characters are supposed to be, and what emotions the story is supposed to exude. Because of this, they go in with certain high expectations, which can be difficult to meet. Sometimes, even stories that are adapted well, considering the challenges faced, still garner large amounts of hate simply for being different from the source material, which isn't fair. Especially when you consider that all films are adaptations of sorts, yet no one sends directors of original scripts death threats for butchering a character archetype. So yeah, ultimately everything, whether it be a movie, or music, or poetry, or whatever, is a kind of adaptation of other pre-existing things. And that's fine, because all art builds upon other art that came before it. And in general, that's how we as a species grow. We are inspired by and strive to improve upon the works that came before us.
Some like it hot.
At the Red Shoes,
Within Norfair.
Sunset Boulevard,
Kenji Hukasaku's Battle Royale.
You know, hope maybe someone will watch my videos and then learn from my genius takes, then be inspired to become the smartest, best filmmaker in the world. And then they'll give me all their money for inspiring them. Hopefully that person is M. Night Shyamalan, who will finally start making good movies again. You have it in you, M. Night. I know you do. Keep fighting. You got this. Folks, today I come before you, dressed like Tony Soprano, humbled and humiliated after having spent an entire year on a 3-part video that was supposed to be 1 part, and it was supposed to come out in the spring. Yes, I started working on part 1 of this back in January, and now it's December. That was an entire year of my life. And speaking of things that have happened in my life, as you may have noticed, this isn't my old room. That's because I moved, and actually I moved quite a while ago. I've just been intentionally filming at my old place, which I'm going to continue to do for a while, you know, before I gradually phase it out, because my room in that building is so much cooler. But yeah, I live here. It's not even in the same city as my other place, and I'm just doing university. Speaking of university, it's finals week, so I've absolutely no idea why the fuck I'm working on this video. Thank you to everyone that stuck around and watched all 2.5 hours of this. I got big plans for 2022, so stay tuned, and I'll catch you later, alligator. And there was no love story, by the way. I lied about that. I tricked you. I tricked you into watching this, and you didn't even see it coming. Oh, you're still here. I mean, I'm not sure what's causing you to stick around, but might as well give you a little Easter egg for, you know, sticking it out. I did tell you what the worst adaptation ever is, that being The Last Airbender, but I never told you what the best adaptation ever is, right? That'd be useful knowledge. And if I'm being honest, the best adaptation ever is Lord of the Rings. No, not that Lord of the Rings. The good one. The Soviet 90s Lord of the Rings. I don't know why Peter Jackson even bothered making his movies. I mean, there was already a perfectly good adaptation.